Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells you all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me, my books, and blogs on dismantlingfamilycourtcorruption.com as well as on Amazon. And the books are also in audio. You can also find me on YouTube at Slam the Gavel. And please like and subscribe. I have a brand new guest. I'm happy to have attorney Bethany Niman on. Now, she recently went solo as a lawyer and opened up Bright Star Law. Her focus is on estate planning and criminal defense cases. She's also practicing in Idaho and Montana. Currently, she's offering basic estate planning packages for $250, which includes simple wills, medical and financial power of attorneys, declaration of wills, and declaration of homestead. And discounts are available for couples and veterans. And to schedule a consultation, you can send her a message on Facebook or her email, which I will put in the podcast notes, Bethany.Niman, Niman, at starlawid.com. And she is from Idaho. I welcome you, Attorney Beth Niman. I'm happy to have you on this early on the podcast.
Oh, thank you. It is early, but thankfully in Idaho, the snow has stopped falling, and we
Oh,
finally have some sunny days. So it is worth being up and watching the sunrise.
that's amazing. You were still having snow.
Yes, I think on Mother's Day, about an hour away, they got 6 inches. So I'm grateful to not look out my window and see that. I love the snow, but I like the summer too. So.
Definitely. Definitely. We have some things because there's issues in Idaho that a lot of people don't know what's going on in Idaho. We haven't heard much from Idaho, actually. What are you seeing?
So I wasn't looped into what was going on in Idaho, because I feel like some of the outlying cities, like I live in Idaho Falls, so I'm a pretty good distance away from Boise. I feel like a lot of those things are not necessarily hidden, but maybe not as readily um, talked about or available. And so I wasn't actually really looped into the problems in the Idaho court system when it comes to family law until I was retained by a client, and I'm just going to refer to her as Sarah. I was retained by Sarah, who brought to my attention how poorly the communication and the decision making and the bias is within the family court system, and how somebody can be a victim of domestic violence one day and then be uh, allegedly a predator or a bad parent or negligent, in a form of retribution from that same person, and the court uphold that. And so, yeah, we are currently in our ninth month of fighting a custody battle for somebody who's in that exact situation.
I'm seeing this a lot too, and this is how they drag out the cases. If a parent calls out domestic violence, even with evidence, the judge is not looking at evidence and or the clerk may not be giving him the evidence.
Yeah, one of the big things that we saw in this case was before Sarah retained me, trying to handle the case herself. I mean, one of the things that you see a lot is these self-service opportunities, and I support that. Not everybody can afford an attorney, and not all attorneys are reasonably priced. And so there's supposed to be these self-service options where you can represent yourself. But when I was retained, one of the first things that I was told by the judge was that Sarah had emotionally overfiled, and that he was essentially frustrated with her for filing too many documents. But in her mind, she thought, I'm going to just do whatever I'm asked to do. I'm going to do whatever makes sense. I'm going to follow this checklist, and I'm going to do these things because I want to get my kids back. And if this is what it takes, if these are the documents the judge needs to see, then let me get them in front of him. And so for him to twist that and to essentially treat her like she should have a law degree and should understand each of the steps, and to not honor that pro se opportunity or option that people should have, that to me is crazy. It's asinine.
Right. And we're talking about Judge Chad Gulstrom.
Yes, of the Canyon County court system.
So I was told, and I've been pro se, even by a judge, I have to treat you differently because I know you're not a lawyer. So I'm going to go slow with you. They know they have to give some latitude to these pro se litigants. And by the way, they all hate pro se litigants because they clog up the system.
Yeah, that's very true. I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in court where somebody is adamant that they want to represent themselves. And while we all believe that it's not in their best interest, we understand that they don't want to have to sell a kidney to have to, fight a battle that they see as an easy win. In Sarah's case, this should have been an easy win. There was an allegation of a little bit of abuse. Well, if we go back just a little bit further, her spouse was accused and convicted of felony domestic violence related charges and was placed on probation. 28 days after he got off of probation, while she thought they were in a somewhat healthy relationship, working towards keeping their family together. Out of the blue, she gets served and told that because her child had a minor injury to his head, that she was somehow at fault for that, and because she couldn't justify where it actually came from, other than speculation, they were able to just throw the book at her and just, they gave this abuser emergency custody to the kids. Well, very quickly, these allegations were proven to be false. Very quickly, they were able to see that Sarah was a great mom. She was actively involved. She had raised a child that was an older teenager, and that there were no complaints up to that point. But yet, even with those allegations being proven false, just cut and dry, no questions asked, we're still 8 months with her without her kids.
And this is causing great damage to these children, which I think Judge Gallstrom should be aware of the ASUS scores, the Adverse Childhood Experience score, what this does to children. This is also, well, this could be another podcast, but this is causing such great damage. What the ASUS scores do, and a lot of parents don't know about these, but if a child has a high ASUS scores, which mine do, it can cause premature death when they're adults.
Yep. So I am actually a childhood trauma victim myself, and I did my ACEs scores when I was in my 30s, as some of that trauma was starting to reappear. And I can see how there's a direct correlation between the things that I deal with now as an adult, that go back to that feeling of instability, that feeling of not being loved or not being wanted. In this case, we have a mom who wants her kids more than anything in the world, has literally done everything right, and is still being told that that's not good enough because she has a narcissistic abuser, a narcissistic person who has now found a new way to control her. The damage that's being done to these kids, I believe they're 4 and 6, if I'm correct, or um, the youngest has autism, so he's already struggling to understand the world and to be growing up into a somewhat normal, young male. But now on top of that, you've ripped mom away and you can't see mom and you can't talk to mom. And when you do, it has to be under these very strict circumstances, or there has to be a supervisor. What do you think he's going to remember from that when he's, 12, 13, starting to go into puberty, feeling like he doesn't have that bond with mom anymore?
Mhm.
Those aren't that is not what this system was intended for.
Right. And these personality disorders, you don't know if they are installing fear and hatred toward that other parent. And I hate to say brainwashing.
That's actually probably a really good word to use. I know that in some of the interactions that Sarah was having with her kids, like Zoom calls, as soon as the conversation went to an area that the abuser didn't like, he would end the calls. If there was the older sister would appear in the frame, he would end the calls. And so, if he's willing to do those things in such an obvious way, what is he doing behind the scenes? What is being said behind the scenes? So definitely, I definitely am going to believe that there's probably some brainwashing going on. Poor little girl came into one of the therapy sessions, or I'm sorry, one of the visitation sessions, and said that she was afraid she was going to die. And Sarah wasn't able to dig into that and ask, follow-up questions, but out of context, what does that mean? What is going on that you have that fear hanging over your head? So,
And that's these visitation centers, of course, these are extortion money makers, but these extortion, or I'm sorry, these counselors, are they documenting this? Why aren't they mandated reporters to
mhm.
directly notify the judge? This is what the child stated. I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on there.
Well, and what's actually really interesting to me, and I didn't know this, and I would ask that if any of your viewers would correct me on this, then I would gladly love to hear back about this. But from what I understood was they wouldn't provide any video of the visits. That was against their policy. And so there were these interactions that did happen, things that were said that were noted by the supervising person. But when Sarah requested, audio and video of that, she was denied, and eventually her visits were terminated. And part of their argument, according to them, was that it was because her requests were too. Um, they went against their policy. And so I don't know if that's just unique to the company that she was using or if that's, across the board, but why are we not talking transparency? Why are we not forcing these people who are the voices of the kids to provide access to the proof? Um, or at least say, well, we're not going to give you that. That goes against our policy. But if you want to record your sessions, you're more than welcome to. So that way, again, parents at least have that tool to use in their favor if it's needed. In Sarah's case, it is needed.
Right. I'm hearing from other parents that they're not allowed to record their sessions, that they also have a supervisor standing over them saying, "Oh, you can't say that to your child. Oh, you can't hug your child. Don't wish your,
Don't bring presents.
don't bring," yeah, exactly. In fact, I know of a mom that I've interviewed multiple times. The child came in with um, half an eyebrow shaved off. How did that happen? Can't question the child. So
Oh my
these
goodness.
places are, they're allowing abuse. They're complicit in the abuse. And they're charging parents upwards of 50 to $400 an hour just to see their child. Where, if you're a criminal in prison, you get to see your child for free.
Oh, yeah, 100%. These are just another money-making scheme. And I would have never thought going into law school, maybe I had rose-colored glasses on, but I would have never thought that the system in Idaho was so driven by money. And I understand that there's a budget shortfall everywhere across the country, across the world, really. But why would we use the most vulnerable of our society, families who are struggling, kids who need help, people who are finding themselves in criminal situations that they can't afford? Why are we exploiting them by causing them to pay supervision fees that are outrageous, pay probation fees that if you don't have your fees paid off at the end of your probation, they can extend your probation or put you in jail? I mean, this is not it doesn't lead to the deterrence for criminal cases, and it doesn't lead people to have confidence that if they enter the system and they have the court help them establish custody or have them walk through that process with them, that they're going to get a fair outcome. it's going to terrify them, and people are just going to try to do things themselves, which leaves people like Sarah unprotected. Sarah had written a custody plan when her ex, when her abuser, I'm trying to think of what the right term would be, when her abuser was originally convicted, they put a custody plan in place for kind of a what if scenario. And then as soon as the situation arose, that custody plan went right out the window, but it had no legal binding because it was just something they had written up between themselves. And I believe his attorney. And so she had no authority to use it or to call it into play or to show the cops and say, this is what he's supposed to be honoring. It meant nothing. But yet we don't have any faith in the system to go to the courts and have them do it. What does somebody do? How would I advise somebody to move forward if they were at the beginning of this situation?
Hmm. Parents have told me that, friends, whoever will say, just walk away from family court. Don't go in there. Well, if you're dealing with a personality slash abuser, you get sucked into it, whether you like it or not. And you could be in there. My case went from 2012 to 2018. And you could be in there for years, wasting and being extorted everything you own.
Yeah, it's true. When you think of a case going on for 8 months, that was just a clear cut, open and dry case, you can't make sense of it. Sarah calls me and she asks me, can you make sense of this? Can you explain to me, what happened in court or why the judge said or did the things that he did? And I can't. I literally say, even with a law degree, even as an educated person who keeps current on laws and evolutions and changes and is following these different changes, I can't tell you what just happened because that's not what's supposed to happen. So if I have a family member who is like, don't go through that system, let's just do it ourselves.
Mhm.
How do I push them and say, but you won't have the safety net that you need from the courts to ensure that this gets honored because I am losing faith in that system. And that's a really hard place to be as an attorney.
Right. Some people can divorce amicably, which I did, and we co-parented for 10 years until he remarried and she worked in the courthouse and inserted herself in the co-parent relationship. So any settlement anyone draws up, they better include what happens when there's a remarriage. But
Yep, that's
will it be
not talked about
followed?
very much.
Yeah, the thing is, will it be followed? Because these judges, and what I'm hearing from everybody, they're not holding anyone in contempt. There's no accountability. If they go to sue the judge, there's immunity, and they're getting away. This is like the Wild West.
It is. We actually talked about that, about when I was in court the very first time, asking the judge based off of his own statements, do you think that recusing yourself at this point would be appropriate? Because, I can hear the bias that's in your voice. And I believe that judges become judges because they have put the years and the experience, and I want to give them a level of deference. But I'm hearing in your voice, and I'm hearing by the things that you're saying that you have a bias already against Sarah, and we haven't even gone to trial yet. Like we're still this is the pre-trial phase. And he said, no, I think that, understanding all of the emotional filings that she has done and her behaviors to date is important to make a fair ruling. And of course, his attorney on the other side is like, oh yeah, recusing yourself would be inappropriate. Um, but that's the reality that's what's happening is there's too much bias, there's too much personal knowledge going into it. Idaho's a very small state. I can't tell you the number of times that I've sat in court where somebody is like, "How's your mom and dad?" For a defendant's parents because they know them. This world is way too small, and when you can see that obvious bias because they don't approve of the things that the defendant has been doing, um, why are they not taking accountability and stepping back and saying, okay, we can see that and this isn't the best option for the child, for the families. We need to step out of this case and let somebody new take over.
Anytime, and I'm hearing this too, anytime you ask a judge to recuse themselves, they will retaliate on you for doing so, or even filing a judicial complaint, which I did in my case. And he found out about it and he was ticked off, but my case was rigged to begin with. So that's another podcast. But also, parents, they don't realize they're going to be retaliated, even if you ask them to recuse themselves. They're not following their judicial canons whatsoever.
No, and this was I had to think about that as I brought that, into the conversation. And it sucks because free speech is being, imposed on, but you also don't want to say something that is going to give power to the judge, or a reason for them to side with the other side, even if what you're saying is factual. And so I had to really walk that line when I brought it up and said, well, based off of some of the things that you've said, do you think that recusal would be the best option? And then I had to follow that with, I believe that judges, have a lot of deference and I believe that they've earned their place, almost like retracting my request for the recusal, but really just padding it to make sure that he understood that I wasn't trying to, say anything that he was doing anything wrong. That's a crappy place to be in. And
Mhm.
I was actually very glad that Sarah wasn't on that particular thing because I don't know if I felt like I was at my best at that moment, but that's a line you have to walk because you don't want your client to get retaliated against for something that looks very obvious to an outsider.
And all of this is obvious with all the evidence that parents have. These judges aren't, they're just disregarding it. They may be looking at it and they're disregarding it. They could be being paid off. They're in collusion with the opposing attorney, for instance, because they've worked in the DA's department for years together. And that's how people judge shop, is they'll find an attorney who has worked with a certain judge in the DA's department for years. So if you want to win your case, that's what you do.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was a prosecutor in one of the towns here in eastern Idaho, and when I did juvenile prosecution, I remember just being blown away by the fact that the state's public defender that handled juvenile cases in that county had worked directly under the juvenile judge that had recently been appointed. They had worked together for 5 years, probably as supervisor and employee role in the PD's office. And so there were times that I would go in and I would make what felt like to me, and I'm sure again there's bias on my part, but felt like to me and to my team that were very compelling arguments. And we felt very strongly that anything that was said shouldn't undo the arguments that we did, that we were bound to win. And I could count at least three different rulings where it was questionable if the ruling was actually on the merits or if it was actually just, well, this is somebody that I know. And if they're making this argument, if I was in their position, I'd be making the same argument. So I'm going to take that position instead. And that's really hard. I mean, obviously, you need judges who have come from the environment that they are presiding over, but maybe do we want judges to come out of district and into, like moving into a new district where they aren't sitting over attorneys that they worked with or that they have close friendships with, because even those canons that you talked about, that has to be either treated with integrity and the judges have to be very intentional, or they have to do those things behind closed doors. They have to have these friendships or relationships behind closed doors after they become a judge where nobody's watching and just hope that, they don't get caught. And so that's really what this feels like. That it feels like in this small town that Sarah lives in, there's probably some previous relationship between the opposing attorney and the judge, because they speak very freely to each other. And Sarah believes that she's even witnessed this attorney go into chambers before a hearing and have a conversation. Now, can we say definitively that that is not about a different case? No, but it sure is suspicious. And part of our job is to avoid the look of impropriety, especially as a judge. So, why that would even be allowed to happen ahead of a hearing, with those two, with that party, is suspicious.
I see that all the time, especially in my case, the opposing attorney, Arthur Taylor, he would always go in and talk, he would always go into the chambers. And as a pro se, I really think I should have followed him. If he's going in, we should both be able to sit down and talk, just
Yep.
end it now. Let's just talk and get the case done and over with. But that's what he was doing all the time. They all do it.
It's so frustrating. As a pro se person, you have no idea what those lines are, what you can cross and what you can't cross. And you didn't get a law degree. You didn't spend 3 years studying how to protect yourself, because who would anticipate that you would be going through those kind of needs. But even so, that is so wrong. That's just setting such a bad standard. And the fact that um, they're allowed to do that. I always believed that if one attorney or if one party got an attorney and the other party couldn't afford it, which is normal in a power imbalanced relationship,
Mhm.
um, the state should be obligated to appoint an attorney to the other side. You shouldn't have any case where one party is represented and the other party isn't, unless they choose that for themselves. Um, Hearing cases like you saying that you went in, pro se, and that you were going against a paid attorney, like that isn't fair. You were set up for failure from the beginning. Same thing with Sarah. She was set up for failure because she was trying to do things. She was trying to save the money,
Mm-mm.
and that just bit her in the butt.
And as far as filing motions, a pro se will answer the opposing attorney's motion. That's used against the pro se. Now you're a vexatious litigant, but I'm just answering his motion. What's wrong with that?
You can't win. If you answer late, then your objections get thrown out because they're untimely. And if you answer, you think that you have fair objections because it's overly burdensome or it's irrelevant to the case. And so
Hmm.
you put those things out there, but you miss it by a day or two, then they throw it out, or they insist that you reply. Yeah, there's definitely some victimization that can happen in the documentation. The things, the perjury that comes from the other side. Who is holding the other side accountable for the answers that they're giving you? When Sarah's abuser responded to the interrogatories, there were flat out lies. And Sarah told the judge in court, like, Your Honor, you have seen these. This is perjury. Like, he's lying to you both on paper and in your face. But yet you said this just a few minutes ago. Judges aren't holding people in contempt. They're not holding them to the standards that they should be held to. How do we force that? Do we have to file a whole separate motion? There we go. Another motion, more vexatious litigation. Do we file another motion to hold them in contempt, or do we believe that the court system knows the process and is going to do it on the record like they're supposed to?
They don't. There's always a slap on the wrist. I've heard it. Yeah. For the last going on 5 years of this podcast, slap on the wrist for all these people for custodial interference or not doing their psych eval. That's what they're just they're like you said, there is no accountability. The only solution with this family court system, I feel it should be abolished and have everything go through civil court where a parent can opt to have a jury. Now, eh, because you've been in juvenile court and this people say, well, a jury can be tampered with, but I want to believe that would be kind of hard to do, hopefully, in some of these cases. I'm just throwing it
I,
out
I
there.
think I think that that's a really interesting thought process, something I hadn't thought about, actually running it through as a civil proceeding. I mean, because that's how they're filed anyway. And I could see the argument that creating a family court, a dedicated court, would be in family's best interest, but obviously not. Obviously, we need to go back to the drawing board, and what we're doing isn't working. We have people who are being abused physically, emotionally, financially, every way possible, and then turning around and suffering retaliation for having that honest conversation. And so the system isn't working. I do think that juries are going to be a lot better. Part of your voir dire is to weed out the ones that aren't going to be able to make a unbiased decision, and so you do the best you can there. But at least if you're answering to 6 or 12 people, then you have a chance for somebody to hear what you're trying to say. Somebody who is willing to look at the evidence a little bit closer. And so it only takes one to undo a whole, if you have 6 people, it only takes one to undo the whole group, and to either get the case thrown out or to have it retried, especially in criminal cases. And so if you can reach that one person and you're not relying on the biases of just a judge who's just a solo person, your outcome has to be better. I very rarely can see times where leaving your future or the future of your family or the future of your criminal defense case, whatever it is, in the hands of one person is better than opening the conversation up to multiple people.
Mhm. It's very discouraging. There's so many advocates and groups out there that want reform. And I don't think you can reform corruption. The corruption is so deep in family court. They all know each other. They're all playing in the same sandbox. And as a pro se, sometimes that can be helpful when you actually hear that they are playing in the same sandbox. Because I was trying to get a case moved to federal court, and the opposing attorney was just sitting there, and the judge said to him before we all started, she says, "Oh, so you're out of the prosecutor's office, and so you're taking on a couple cases now." And I'm going, "Oh, he's new. He doesn't know what he's doing. This is great." So I had a field day with him, and I did get my case moved into the federal court, and he was trying to argue with the judge that this shouldn't happen. And the judge said, she wants to do this. I'm going to let her do this. And she's talking to him like he was in the fourth grade.
I love that.
So, I mean, you get these small victories as a pro se, but you're still not getting that job done for justice.
No, and that one small victory feels good in the moment, but how hard did you have to fight, and how many
Ugh.
times did you fail, or did you feel unheard, or just ignored completely to get to that one point? And how many times after that? So that's great, and I love it when judges just put the opposing party in check and remind them that they don't have the say all. But at this point it seems like early on the judges are deciding who the winners and who the losers are before any evidence is ever presented. And so when it's like, is it just going in one ear out the other?
Hmm.
I talked to the judge this past case that last week, and we were trying to get a modification to Sarah's protection order. And the judge, I was explaining that, every time Sarah's kids were on a Zoom call, if she said something that the abuser didn't like, or if her oldest daughter came into the view and wanted to talk to her siblings, she's 17, that he would just disconnect the call. Okay, so that is not honoring the judge's orders of allowing, Zoom calls twice a week and, ending them early for no reason other than he just didn't want what was being said or being done to happen. And it wasn't anything wrong, but yet the judge just he was so flippant about it, just dismissed it and just said, "Yep, we're going to trial in a couple weeks." And it's like, but Sarah still has the whole month of June that she could see her kids. Our case
Mhm.
doesn't go to trial till the end of June. You have the power to say this is not okay. This is not appropriate, but you fail to use it. What the heck?
Right. And what this personality disorder abuser's doing is installing child psychological abuse, which in 2014, the APA wrote an article that child psychological abuse is far worse than physical and sexual combined. So that was a big thing because you cannot reverse the child psychological abuse of that brainwashing, for lack of a better word. So he's letting this go on. This judge
Well,
is complicit. He himself, this judge, Chad Gulstrom, is a child psychological abusers along with them all.
yep, yep.
And he cannot let
I
this
agree.
happen.
And we had talked previously off record when we were talking about the ASUS score and the trauma that is being inflicted upon these children, not just Sarah's children, but children are the victims in these cases. So, whether you go into a divorce and there's not all the extra baggage of victimization and stuff, divorce in itself is traumatic. It's a stressful thing. Kids are already going to feel unwanted or like they did something wrong. Um, and so those already, for lack of a better term, those already have to be handled with kid gloves. But then you start incorporating a parent who gets custody or gets partial custody after being an abuser or after being absent for long periods of time or having been in prison, and these kids end up coming out of a situation that was already broken and being traumatized, being hurt by these decisions. So when you think about it, Sarah is a victim to this because she hasn't seen her kids, but really her young ones are the real victims because they're going to carry what has happened over these last 8, 9, 10 months. And before that, the victimization, the trauma and abuse, they're going to carry that into their teenage years, into their adulthood years. And you can't go back and erase that.
Mm-mm.
That's going to be part of who they are. And it's going to be built into their core memories that these things happened. Why is the court not realizing we live in 2025 when mental awareness and mental health is prevalent and we're talking about it? Why are we not talking about the trauma to the kids? Because that should be one of the biggest factors that leads, and that's what the statutes say, the best interest of the
Mm.
child. This is not the best interest of the child.
Also, I think the whole mission of these courts, this is just my theory, is that they want damaged children coming out of family court due to the child psychological abuse. So they will carry on with them the generational curse. So they eventually will meet and marry someone, and they will put that person through family court. So they will have an ongoing machine that's well oiled. The system is not broken. It's working great for them. That's the plan. And the plan is they give them to the abuser who also neglects education, where a child could be 10 years old and on a second grade reading level. They want this. These judges, in my opinion, are destroying the country from the inside out. They want these children to grow up and to be very easily manipulated as adults.
Yeah, I'm the parent of a teenager myself. I have a 15-year-old son, and I remember one time getting a phone call about his behavior and him, talking back to a teacher. And what he had said was done in a normal tone of voice and, was very fact-based, and he was responding to what he was being told. And I remember standing in front of the principal and this teacher and saying, I don't want my son to just be a sheep. If he sees things that are wrong, I want him to, in a respectful way, articulate and push back. Why are we teaching our kids that law enforcement, judges, they're the ultimate authority and what they say goes? We shouldn't be asking questions because you're right. This cycle is there. We can see it. We can go back. We can follow the family lines and see the girls who had abusive dads or sexually abusive dads or physically abusive, whatever, who are now in marriages or have been in relationships that were this are the same way. Or the prison system, people who were abused as children, who have grown up to be abusers or be part of the criminal world, who are now in prison. And these prisons are profiting off of keeping them in prison or keeping them on parole instead of giving them the resources to break the cycle. So, no, you're 100% correct.
It's so sad because I don't want that to happen. These judges don't care. They say, well, the judges need more training. No, no, they need to get rid of the family court system and just move everything down to civil criminal. If there's an abuse allegation, go right into criminal court, fix it. And that's the problem is parents are shooting out false accusations on the other parent for leverage to get the kids, which was done to me. And, you know, I know a dad that I'm also helping that his child is living with his ex who's living with a 4-count felon. I'm just like, you can't make any of this up. These judges are doing this. All I'm hearing from moms and dads is that they're being taken away and given to the wrong party, and then things are happening where the child is either unaliving themselves or they are being unalived.
I mean, you look at the Decker situation. What flags were there? What warning signs? Even in some of the articles that we have discussed, that have been shared, they talk about the mental instability, whether that be from, being a veteran or just mental health related issues. When people have access to the right resources, then they're able to come out of those traumas and adapt and become the parent that they need to be. But if they deny that there's an issue or the resources aren't available to them, then yeah, we end up with kids who are unalived. Three little girls lost their lives to a dad who, in all intents, looked like he was fine, looked like he loved his daughters. But then, words like, you and the girls are all I have are statements that he's making to the girl's mom. Okay, that's a red flag. You should have more going on in your life than just your
Mm-hmm.
ex and your three daughters. Um, these things don't just happen overnight. And so we should be watching for those flags and those signs. And then we should not be victim shaming people when they're trying to bring them to the appropriate party's attention. We should be educating them and making it very easily accessible who they should be reaching out to. And then we should be listening to them. I told Sarah I would rather err on the side of caution and have CPS come into a family's home and rule that they're wrong than to allow a child to live in a situation where they're being victimized and nobody's listening. But that doesn't mean that every case needs to lead to removal or separation until they make that determination, because once you've broken that barrier, they've proven it's almost hard to come back together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's another issue is the CPS because they are bond breakers with parents. uh, which is another podcast. Unfortunately, they serve no earthly purpose. If there's an issue, I just believe the police should be called. Perhaps there should be not to raise taxpayer dollars, but a certain police division that handles these calls that come in, and 74, I've heard, certain percentages, 74 to 89% are false allegations. So why waste time going on a goose hunt? Then you really could be helping some other poor child. I think if you're going to call in a false allegation, you have to give your name and your phone number and your address. It should just be done. If you believe someone's being abused, there's your accountability. That would stop all false allegations. And that's why CPS should just be gone, and let the police handle it because they will get your name, your address, and your phone number.
Yeah, you're right now you're just making these anonymous calls or these mandatory reporter calls, but then when the family wants to know who it is, they hide behind that anonymous status. They don't have to you don't get to face your accuser. I mean, that's a constitutional right. You don't get that with these anonymous reports. And so yeah, a spouse or an ex person who's looking to get revenge can call 3 times in a row, 3 days in a row, and really make the situation sound awful.
Hmm.
And then it turned out just to be a bonk on the head because, a kid fell, off the swing or whatever. And so, yeah, I don't see how CPS can be beneficial in these cases of false allegation. They're overworked. They're underpaid. There's not enough of them. So even if they did have a place within the system, how can they do their job well? How can they genuinely filter out the good families versus the families that need attention? How can they offer support and resources when there are so many cases on their plate? Same thing with the public defender's office.
Hmm.
There's a reason they have such a bad reputation. We as a society continue to put money into services that are essential. I don't want to ever say that there's nothing that's essential, but we should be focusing on kids. We should be focusing on education and families and resources and access in the family environment because that grows on to grow us our next generation of citizens, leaders, politicians, whatever.
Hmm.
Why would we not want to invest into them instead of just the cycle that you talked about earlier of breaking them, of keeping them in the system, keeping them down? That hurts society as a whole.
Right. And going along with the CPS conversation we were having is I had called the newly elected governor on my case, as I was a registered nurse for 23 years, and I let them know what was going on. They did call CPS and rattled the cage. What that did was retaliation. And as soon as I was cleared of one false allegation of emotional child abuse, I called the hospital saying, "Yay, I can come back." 4 days later, wouldn't you know, there's another false accusation of emotional child abuse that I had to fight off, which in the end cost me my job.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Yeah, I can't even wrap my mind around that. We've talked a lot about the judges and the bias that they have, and but you're right. This actually stems down from much higher. Sarah herself has reached out to the governor's office several times and been advised that her name is essentially blacklisted, that she is being told to, not, or they're being told not to talk to her, that she has these cases, and that's just not true. What's being shared, the information that's being shared. um, but where are the legislators that are writing new laws to protect parents, uh, representing clients who are in these situations? Why are we not, as a society, fighting for change? We just go along with the status quo, and then people become unalived. People lose their children for long durations, if not forever. People are victimized by their abusers in a whole new way, and we have the ability to stop it. But it's going to require it to come from the top down. The CPS workers only have as much authority as they are given statutorily. Now they don't always do their job well. Obviously, we just talked about that. And so if they get caught up in that cycle too and make bad reports or inaccurate reports, then that hurts. But even if they're making accurate reports and then the courts aren't handling those
Mhm.
reports appropriately, or there's no accountability up the chain, then families stay torn apart, which is exactly what's happening with Sarah's case.
And it's so wrong. Her case is so, like you said, clear cut. It should have been over with months and months and months ago, where she should have been given full custody and him supervised visits. And
Well,
I,
and she's not the only one.
right.
I mean, in Idaho, this is proving to be a real problem. There's another case. I won't speak names just because they haven't retained me and they haven't given me authorization. But I will say that there's another case where the abuser tried to drown the children and then was unsuccessful and then eventually filed, false allegations against the mom. And that mom has almost gone bankrupt fighting for years.
Yep.
There's another case closer to where I am that I was personally involved with, that the mom had been the primary caregiver of her three girls their whole life, had a mental issue that showed up, was proven that it was an acute mental illness. It came and it went. It wasn't something that was long term. She started seeking medical care, got treatment, did everything the doctors advised to make sure that it didn't happen again. And that mental illness has been used against her for
Mhm.
over a year, and even though from day one it was proven that there was no drug addiction, she was required by the ex to submit to these expensive drug tests 3 times a week that she had to pay for. And every time they were negative, 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 because it wasn't a drug addiction issue, it was a mental health issue. She still, a year later, does not have her girls back. And she was their primary caregiver. So Sarah is not a one off.
Mhm.
She
Mhm.
is showing that this is a prevalent problem, that once you are in this cycle, getting your kids back and breaking it is almost impossible. I would love to talk to you again after June 26th when we go to court and we will hopefully have a resolution to this, because I only see one of two outcomes. The outcome that all of the lies and perjury and abuse come out and the judge sees it and gives it the credibility that it's due, or in her big fear that somehow the judge is going to hear all of these factual testimonies, see all this documentation, and still rule that Sarah is in the wrong for loving her kids too much and keep things as they are. I can't even wrap my mind around that possibility.
Yeah. I will say, and because I won't keep you much longer, there are good judges out there. I did have one when there was custodial interference. My lawyer filed an emergency petition, and it happened like the next day, and we were hauled in there like cattle. And it wasn't like a normal courtroom. It's like he was at a podium, and we were all on eye level. Of course, as soon as I laid eyes on him, I had to look down because he was super hot. But he started screaming at my ex that, how dare you withhold these kids? I can't remember what all he said because there was no court reporter there, right? But he actually gave me more time with my kids. But as you said, and we talked earlier, when even that happened, the ex continued to withhold. That was again brought before the other family court judge who looked at that other judge's order and just disregarded that judge's order and did not even say, "Oh, you're withholding the kids? Well, guess what? Now, all the kids want is 50-50. That's what you're going back to. No child support." That's it. And I think the Title IV defunding with this child support is what's unaliving people. It's causing grotesque crimes. It should be repealed. I don't know how that will happen because it's making each state billions of dollars. So with all 50 states, you're talking about a $100 billion a year business with the family court systems, the foster care system. It's just making way too much money. And there was an article on Substack written by Mike Phillips. And I've also talked to him on the phone, but he wrote about the little girls. And I was reading it. It was like, oh, that was so well written. My comment was, very well written. The judge should see these little ones with his own eyes, his handiwork, and blood is on his hands. He must be off the bench permanently. And the opposing or the mother's counsel, she should just not speak after the article that I saw. And we were talking about this ABC News article written by Megan Forrester on June 5th, 2025. And she seemed very supportive of the father's actions. I mean, if I'm wrong, please somebody correct me. Um, it said here, well, he's still on the run, apparently, this father, but hang on, let me pause this. Here it's written that the mother's attorney says that despite her ex-husband being on the run for killing their daughters, that the mother has a lot of love and empathy for the father and who he is in his core. But she's not saying how upset the mother is for the loss of her own family, those three little girls. What's up with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting statement to make. It's conflicting to everything we know about divorce, even with co-parenting. You get divorced for a reason, and normally it's not because you still love somebody to their core. You can acknowledge that somebody is struggling with mental illness, and be a support system to that recovery or to that journey. But that doesn't mean that you love them to their core, or that relationship has continued. So that definitely feels like a conflicting statement to the situation. This is a mom who just lost three daughters. This is not something when they catch this gentleman, there's nothing that can be done that's going to bring those girls back. And so, if unless she's living in some fantasy world where, a video game where, you get to re-up after you've lost a life, this is a permanent thing for her. So that's I don't think that attorney should be speaking for that mom or on that mom's behalf, because that doesn't accurately reflect the situation. I don't think. I don't know her, but
Right, I
as a
agree.
mom, I
I
can't
agree.
imagine.
It's too soon to speak, and she should not. I personally, if I was a lawyer, I would not have spoken.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I wouldn't have spoken. I wouldn't have made those particular comments.
no.
Uh, I would like to say though that one of the things that you mentioned about the judge's the blood on his hands. Please, any judge, any person in law enforcement or in the judicial system that's listening, let's stop making it be once somebody is unalive. Let's stop making these bold statements after things have happened. Let's start listening. Let's start watching for the red flags. Let's start hearing from the victims when things are not at their worst. We're losing moms of kids, to these domestic violence situations. It's not always just the kid. Well, that mom was somebody's kid. That mom was somebody's mom. That lost life, that matters. And we do see it. I recently lost a client to domestic violence. Her spouse killed her. He lived with the body for 10 days after killing her. Thankfully, her kids were grown, but when they recount their story, they were victims. There was abuse. It wasn't a one-off situation. It didn't just happen once. And so, please, if you're listening to this and you have a voice, we all have a voice, whether that's signing a petition, whether that's, rallying in the right way, not rioting, whatever that is, please use your voice, use your position of authority, use your law degree, and advocate for change at the legislation. Hold your judges accountable, vote them off the bench. If you have had an experience and you know that there's a judge that is not doing it right, those positions are not guaranteed. Vote them off the bench, get somebody in who cares. Look, we have to be the voice for these innocents. We have to. Those three girls shouldn't have died. Sarah's should not have been away from her daughters for 10 months. Like, these things are stoppable.
Mhm, mhm. And I would like to say something good about Chad Gulstrom, the judge Chad. I want to be able to say something good about him. Like I said something good about that other very good looking judge that I had. I'd like to hear good news about a case that they actually did the right thing. You know,
I really hope he come back and tell you on the 26th that he did that he took the information and that he thought it through and that he genuinely listened and that he threw any previous biases out and he went into it with an open heart and an open mind. I really hope that I can come back to you in a couple weeks and tell you that. Because right now, all of the decisions that have gotten us to where we are today do not feel that way. Do not feel like he genuinely cares or that he's willing to hear Sarah's voice and to hear Sarah's concerns. Right now, her two littles are living with an abuser. This abuser is in a relationship with a woman who has multiple felonies for child abuse, for methamphetamine, um, um, like meth labs, and with the intent to distribute.
Manufacturing.
Yes. Sorry, I believe Sarah has joined us.
Sorry, I have
The,
joined. Yeah. So
she,
there, I mean, that's a concern too, just because actually all of the people that he's connected to right now, almost every single one of them, I sent you a bunch of emails. They pretty much all are on felony parole or probation or just got out of prison right before he did this for meth or controlled substance.
so
Um,
I, so I
but he
think just
also has
that
a big history on it.
So I think that the judge has an obligation and has had an obligation to hear those concerns, and to date hasn't. So I do hope that in a couple of weeks, when we visit with you again, that we can give you an update that he had a change of heart and that he realized the errors and uh, on the 26th rules in a way that is the right way, which is for Sarah to have her kids back.
exactly. And I totally appreciate your time. And I won't keep you much longer because I could talk to you all day. But if you want to reach attorney Bethany Niman in Idaho, Bethany.Niman, Niman, at starlawid.com. There's a dot in between starlaw.id.com.
Oh,
I will put that in the podcast notes. Did I say that right?
Yep, or no, it's actually Bethany.Niman at starlawid.com. There's the only period is between Bethany and Niman, and it's just Star Law Idaho, basically. And they can also reach me. Some people don't feel comfortable putting things in writing, so they're also more than welcome to call me. My office number is 208-223-1618. And they're more than welcome to reach out if they don't feel comfortable putting their concerns down in writing. But I really do hope that this advocation and what you're doing, Marion, it's amazing. Um, Continuing to bring light to these circumstances, to these unique cases, oh, well, not unique cases, to these cases that are shedding light on the perpetual issue, the issue that is ruining our nation, ruining our families, breaking up families. I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for Sarah for connecting us. And if I can do anything for you or for your listeners, please let me know, because this has opened my eyes to a world I didn't know was right under my nose. I'm a parent and I've been very lucky to not have experienced them, but I believe that I have the degree to and the ability. So I want to advocate and use that, to help other families. So please, if I can do anything, let me know.
Definitely. And I
So
want to be able
amazing.
to say something good. I want to be able to say something good about this judge. So I hope he's listening. I want to hear something great. So, nobody jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, Apple, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google, and also Amazon. And again, feel free to buy me a coffee to help keep this podcast going. Thank you, Attorney Bethany Niman from Idaho. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.